Call this meeting to order. So welcome to meeting number 127 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. I would like to remind participants of the following points. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed to the chair. Members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can. Pursuant to Standing Order 108, Sub 2, and the motion adopted on October 22nd, 2024, the committee resumes its study of electoral interference and criminal activities in Canada from agents of the Government of India. I would now like to welcome our witnesses for the first hour. We have from the British Columbia Gurdwaras Council, Maninder Singh, spokesperson. And Mr. Singh is also spokesperson for the Sikh Federation of Canada. From the World Sikh Organization of Canada, Balpreet Singh, legal counsel by video conference. And as an individual, we have Serge Granger, Director, School of Applied Politics, University of... It's in the second hour. Sorry, that's the second hour. That's the second hour. I'm way ahead of myself. Okay. It being Diwali today, I understand. Namaste and happy Diwali to everybody. I now invite Mr. Maninder Singh to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I come to you from the unceded occupied territories of the Kwantlen-Katsi and Semiahmoo First Nations. I'd like to thank them for the opportunity to live and work on those lands that they've been caretakers for since times immemorial. I'd also like to recognize that today marks the onset of the first brutal and horrific incidents of Indian state-sponsored planned and orchestrated violence against the Sikh community in November of 1984, a planned genocide in which thousands of Sikhs were murdered across India. The continuation of this state violence, oppression, and now transnational repression has placed its foot firmly in Canada. The challenge before us all, those of us that call Canada home, is how do we stop it? State-sponsored violence is nothing new for India. In their report, Protecting the Killers, the Policy of Impunity in Punjab, India, Human Rights Watch states that from 1984 to 1995, the Indian government ordered counterinsurgency operations that led to arbitrary detention, torture, extrajudicial execution, and enforced disappearances of thousands of Sikhs. This is important today because the continuation of this violence in the form of transnational repression, which has taken the life of Canadian citizens in this country, it should be no question around what India's policy has been towards Sikh activists for the last 40 years. India has engaged in these types of behaviors for decades, but successive governments have ignored this or brushed it under the rug to pursue trade or closer ties to India. Repression is going unchecked, and the international community's response and lack thereof has emboldened India to reach even further. Canada's role effectively granted Indian intelligence networks impunity to operate in Canada, which emboldened them to escalate their violence. Case in point in 2017, when it was known that a nexus of agents of Indian origin were operating in the Vancouver consulate, very little to nothing was done in order to stop them at that time. That eventually led to the assassination of Bhai Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Surrey in June 18th, 2023. All of this evidence is pointing at the fact that India is continuing its transnational repression in a very violent form. The evidence on record demonstrates that India is directly targeting activists for assassination, coordinating generalized violence against the entire community across the country, and the acts of violence through the revelations of the RCMP on October 14th. The reality of the situation in the community is something I can speak to personally. I am one of the individuals in Canada that has received multiple duties to warn of threat of imminent assassination against my life. This places an individual in obviously a very dangerous situation. You're removed from your home, in my case, where you have children that are minors, and you can't be around them. The reality of working within your community, exercising the rights from the Charter for Freedom of Speech and Expression become blurred, and communities suffer greatly, not only just families. The lack of response that we receive in those situations is also very problematic. We have law enforcement agencies that aren't able to provide much help. We don't know where the threat is coming from, and we actually don't know how to react to this type of threat within Canada either. All of these things over the last 2 years have been right in front of us, Mr. Nijjar, myself, and several others, now dozens others, of Sikh Canadians in Canada. We were forced to choose between retreating from public life and supporting our communities, or continuing our work and risking our lives as a Sikh and as somebody who stands up for human rights, which I believe everyone in this room also would adhere to. There was no choice. We had to continue our work. We had to continue to speak out. We had to continue to exercise those rights that are enshrined within the Charter of Freedom of Speech and Expression. That was the only option that we had, and we continue to do so, and we will do so going into the future as well. This is what an authoritarian regime like India looks like, and this is what they want, to intimidate and shut down dissenting voices. But that's not going to be possible in Canada, and it's definitely not going to be possible for the Sikh community in Canada. Transnational repression tactics include assassinations, attempts, threats, and intimidation of Sikh activists. The assassination of Bhai Hardeep Singh Nijjar is a blatant example of how deeply India has penetrated into Canada, not only with the assassinations, but undermining of general elections, nominations for candidates in political parties, all the way to leadership races and in that sphere as well. We have evidence that has been presented at the Foreign Interference Commission that verifies all of this. India has conducted these operations for over 40 years. I myself have come out over the last 2 years several times stating that we have known in the Sikh community that India is interfering within Canada. I'd like to read you something. India conducts intelligence operations in Canada at 2 levels, directly through its consulates in Toronto and Vancouver, and indirectly through infiltration of the Canadian Sikh community. India's target is a well-organized international Sikh lobby that is the financial, intellectual, and administrative backbone of the drive for a homeland in Punjab. According to the sources, India's intelligence activities in Canada include the spreading of false information, the use of paid informers, and the instigation of activities to discredit the Sikh separatist movement. This is not something that was put out in the last 6 months. This is from November 28, 1984 in the Globe and Mail in Canada. Canada has known about Indian interference for 40 years. Canada, its media, and the Sikh community all have known about it. The unfortunate reality is little to nothing has been done about it. In closing, we have 4 things that we think that would help protect Canadians. The suspension of security and intelligence agreements with India in the short term. It's a short-term mechanism to ensure that there is safety within Canada for all Canadians. A public inquiry into the assassination of Mr. Nijjar, along with India's activities and the revelations of violence that have been put forward by the RCMP on October 14th. As far as we know, India is the only country to inflict this much violence in Canada on Canadian citizens on Canadian soil. Prosecution of conspirators and perpetrators, and imposition of targeted sanctions against Indian diplomats that are believed to be involved in this, especially those that have been removed from this country, and a support for the Sikh community in combating rise in anti-Sikh hate, which has a direct link back to India's misinformation and disinformation campaigns against Sikhs. And finally, I implore you all to ask me questions about the real lived experience of Indian foreign interference. If anyone here remains silent on this issue, it will actually speak volumes to where they stand and who they are seeking to protect. We're all here as Canadians. We're all here in order to protect this country and its freedoms. And right now, it's the Sikh community that's facing the brunt of this violence. But in the future, it can be any community. And there has to be no party lines that force us to work together to combat this type of hate, this type of violence on Canadian soil. This is a life and death situation for the Sikh community, for sure. But it's also the sovereignty of Canada that's being undermined, and all Canadians. Your response here now will be indicative of the priority you give our lives and your commitment to your elected office to safeguard the interests of this country first. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We go now to Mr. Balpreet Singh for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Balpreet Singh. I'm legal counsel for the World Sikh Organization of Canada. Today, as we approach the 40th anniversary of the 1984 Sikh genocide in India, we're here to discuss India's continued targeting of Sikhs in Canada. But it's absolutely essential to understand the context of this ongoing interference. For decades, the government of India has targeted Sikhs and other minorities without any consequences. Tens of thousands of Sikhs were killed by the Indian state with no accountability or reckoning. For 40 years, Sikhs in Canada have known that India engages in foreign interference and targets our community. This has been a truth that's been an open secret. Open Secrets is also the title of a book by a former Indian diplomat and intelligence officer, M.K. Dar, who was stationed in Ottawa from 1983 to 1987. In his memoir, he admits that his mission was to penetrate select gurdwaras, establish assets within the Sikh community, and quote-unquote make a few friends amongst Canadian members of parliament. Several other books and articles have documented India's espionage and interference aimed at Canada's Sikhs. Canada has long been aware of this interference, but has often looked the other way or treated India with kid gloves. This interference has taken several forms, continues to take several forms. The first is visa manipulation. So the primary tool India uses is the Indian visa. So individuals are denied visas for expressing views India deems objectionable, while others are coerced into actions or statements in exchange for visas. Some individuals have been forced to sign pre-drafted letters supporting India, which are then used to extort them. Even Canadian politicians have been subject to these tactics. Intimidation of relatives in India, surveillance of individuals and events, and media manipulation and disinformation, creating narratives that favor the Indian government's positions. The impact on the Sikh community has been profound. Sikhs are coerced into avoiding discussions about Khalistan, a sovereign Sikh state. For India, any dialogue about Khalistan is labeled as extremism or terrorism, and this is a nuance that's often misunderstood in the West. India has worked very hard to make Khalistan a scary term. Supporters of Khalistan have faced torture and disappearance in India, and India seeks to make that repressive approach normal and export it to Canada. However, here we have freedom of expression, and that's protected, of course, by the Charter. The current tensions that we're seeing can be traced back to 2015, when a notable number of Sikhs were elected as MPs and also included in cabinet. This was seen as a threat by India, which quickly framed the Canadian government as being influenced by quote-unquote Khalistani extremists. A report in September 2023's The Bureau by Sam Cooper indicated that in 2017, CSIS was aware of increased Indian diplomatic activities targeting the Sikh community, including monitoring, vote manipulation, and visa coercion. However, Ottawa allegedly halted actions due to political sensitivity in the impending 2018 Canadian delegation to India. That delegation, as we know, was subsequently targeted by India, which used the false narrative of Sikh extremism to taint the visit. Canada attempted to appease India by signing the Framework for Cooperation on Countering Terrorism and Violent Extremism, which was then portrayed by India as a crackdown on Khalistan supporters. Sikhs in Canada have repeatedly reported Indian interference to law enforcement and CSIS, but it's not clear that it had any effect. In June 2022, I personally informed CSIS that India might attempt to target Sikh activists under the guise of gang wars based on Indian media narratives. After Padman Singh Malik's murder in July 2022, I warned CSIS of risks to the lives of Hardeep Singh Nijjar and other activists. Duties to warn were issued, but no real protection was provided, leaving many feeling resigned to their fate. The Prime Minister's announcement in Parliament last year and the RCMP's recent statement were a welcome breath of fresh air and feel like vindication for our community. However, India's interference now extends to our democratic institutions and elected officials. Indian influence is seen in nomination races, elections, and there are allegations of MPs receiving funds from India to raise specific issues in Parliament. Make no mistake, India's actions reflect a hostile and rogue nation acting with impunity. Canada and its allies must reevaluate their relationship with India. Turning a blind eye or handling it with kid gloves is no longer an option. We must continue to expose and counter Indian interference as we've begun to do over the past year. This is a moment that's absolutely critical for our community, but also for our country. Canada must commit to shutting down India's foreign interference that has continued unabated for the past 40 years. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll start our round of questions. Our first round with Ms. Dancho. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to both the witnesses for being here and for your excellent testimony. I deeply appreciated your remarks. And you both touched on the concern when duties to warn are issued about the lack of protection following that. Can you both go into some detail of what that experience is like? And if you could choose, what would you want to see from police and others for additional protections or the like? Mr. Moninder Singh, would you like to start?
Yeah, definitely. I can speak with experience with multiple duties to warn issued against me. I would think that one of the problems we see is that there is very little information of where the threat is coming from, so you're not really know what to look out for. There's very little resources that are provided when it comes to direction as to what how you can safeguard yourself. There's simple things like get a security camera, be aware of your surroundings. But when you have somebody that's telling you from law enforcement that you have an imminent threat of assassination against your life, those things are not things that are going to protect anyone living in Canada. As we saw in the case of my friend Mr. Nidger, who also received the same warning with me in July of 2022. What we'd like to see is actually going deeper. Why does this risk persist in the first place? We feel like an inquiry to actually understand India is what's needed first. The safeguarding is really just putting Band-Aids on a bleeding wound that won't stop right now with what India is doing. So an inquiry will go deep enough into the situation to understand how deeply India has penetrated into Canada, where in our electoral systems, where in our academia, where in our media, and where in our politics they're interfering. And I think that's the only way to understand them and then to be able to counter them. I think the rest of it is really Band-Aid solutions. The law enforcement agencies don't have the ability to put cars in front of people's homes 24/7. I have 2 years of duty to warns that are still persisting. To expect the Canadian government, the law enforcement agencies to station multiple officers with me at all times is just not feasible for this country. And it shouldn't have to happen. So I think we go to the root of the problem versus the Band-Aid solutions that will just maybe keep people safe for the time being, but it's not getting to the actual cause of the whole situation, which is India.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. And Mr. Balpreet Singh, do you have anything to add to that?
I'll just briefly add that I've spoken to a number of people that have received these duties to warn. You are visited by law enforcement. You are given a piece of paper to read, which is then taken back. You are then not told what the source of that threat is. You are not given any real resources to protect yourself. You are told that you must, change your routines and take precautions, but what those precautions and changes to routines would look like is not clear. These people feel abandoned, they feel a little bit helpless, and they feel stigmatized. If this information goes out into the community, they don't want other people to know necessarily, because then they won't feel safe being around in those same spaces. So it's a very unsatisfactory process. And I'm not sure how much it actually helps.
Thank you for that. Mr. Moninder Singh, am I pronouncing your first name correct, sir? Thank you. Mr. Moninder Singh, you mentioned your family and the impact on your family. I can, just as outlined just now by Mr. Balpreet Singh, just the steps, and I can't imagine just being at home and getting a knock at the door to that and then kind of being left to your own devices, especially when you have children and a spouse at home. Can you just go into a bit more detail of the impact that has? And I appreciate what you're saying to get to the root of the cause, I agree, but imminently, are there any things that could be taken, particularly given this is at a very heightened moment? Any comments you have?
The reality becomes that your whole life changes. Coming into rooms like this, you start thinking as to if, where's the safety here? If it's an imminent threat of assassination, as law enforcement and its highest level of national security through the Inside Division that's what they're telling us, then me coming here, am I putting people in this room at risk? Can I go to my kids' schools? Can I go to their practices, their recitals, their games? And it may feel like these are minor things until they happen to you, but your whole life flips upside down when things like that. And you don't want to be around people. The reality of the situation is that you want to protect people around you, especially those people you care about, and even those that you don't know, probably even more, because they have nothing to do with this. So we're thrust into this situation. I think in the immediate sense, what we saw with Mr. Nidger was he changed his routines. He did everything he could. He did everything that you could possibly do to try to protect yourself in that situation. The only thing he didn't do, which none of us will do, is go silent. And I think if we don't go silent, they're going to keep coming. So I don't believe there's anything aside from like a personal security detail that would be provided to individuals at a very extreme cost, I think, to our country as well. I think there's nothing that would really keep people safe from my 2 years of experience now.
Thank you. Do you feel that anything more should be done to hold people accountable that are responsible for this?
I think, again, I would go back to the inquiry, to understand who's actually accountable. Like, we've heard everyone from Mr. Modi to Amit Shah through David Morrison earlier this week, naming that the highest levels of Indian, authorities are involved. So I think we definitely do. One of the things I mentioned at the end was that diplomatic sanctions against Indian intelligence officials and their diplomats that have already been expelled from this country, those would help for sure. But I think ultimately we have to figure out what's going on here, as in what's going on in our backyard and how deeply India has penetrated here. I think those are the only ways to keep all Canadians safe, because this actually went way beyond just a focus group of individuals. It spread out to violence in public. It spread out to business owners. It spread out to members of the Sikh community, but also the broader South Asian community. And it could go wider than that if it's not checked. There's no reason why extortion wouldn't then just go to all Canadians if we let gangs from India come into this country and operate at the behest of the Indian government.
Thank you, Ms. Nacho. Go now to Mr. Chahal. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank both the witnesses for joining us today and for your opening statements and the important testimony you've provided. And I'm going to go to the root cause. I mean, why we're here is interference by a foreign government, in this case, the Indian government, targeting members of the Sikh community in Canada. That is the cause of why we are here today and why we need to discuss this important matter. And your courage, both of you, for talking openly to this committee to address this very important issue. And my shocking surprise that members who are elected to our parliament, who are from our community, from the Sikh community or from the from their heritage from India, are not here, particularly from the Conservative Party, to discuss this important issue. I actually find it quite shocking as a member of the community. You talked about the deep penetration of India targeting Canadians, Canadian citizens, members of the community here who are engaged in political activity or just exercising their charter rights to freedom of speech. Do you believe, and I think both of you have stated, and I'll start with you, with Mr. Singh first, directly with the question, Maninder Singh, and then I'll go to Mr. Balpreet Singh. You've both mentioned nomination and leadership races are of concern. Do you believe in recent history that the Indian government has targeted nomination and leadership races in Canada?
I think absolutely. From what we've seen at the Foreign Interference Commission, all of this has come up. And we're not going to focus on an individual party, but we would say it's all through our general kind of election system, our nominations, our party leaderships, influencing people in bureaucracy, all the way through. So I firmly believe it's everywhere. I don't think it's just limited in any of its scope. I think India, like the Foreign Interference Commission has stated, will find people that lean towards them, that are actively supporting them on many of their initiatives, or people they can control or manipulate in some way, and they will push them forward and support them in their candidacy or nomination. So I'm a firm believer that it's everywhere. I don't think we can limit it to any one individual or one party. I think this is an issue for all of Canada and its systems right now.
Well, Mr. Balpreet Singh, same question to you.
Yeah, so we have heard about these situations where individuals, I'm aware of one person who ran in a nomination who was approached, who was told to soften his tone around India and was offered funding as such, and funding and support. So I'm aware of a number of these sort of situations, but it's all sort of whispers behind the scenes. But I personally feel that it's shocking that this is the case. I'll go as far as to say this: when you have a problem, you're told to go visit your MP. Talk to your MP about the problem. If you don't know who your MP is working for anymore, how do you feel comfortable talking to them? I mean, that's really the situation in our community.
Thank you for that. Do you believe, I know there's been this conversation's been happening throughout Parliament and across the country, that leaders of Canadian political parties should get their security clearances to know what's happening within their parties and have the appropriate intelligence to take action. Do you believe that all Canadian elected officials, leaders of our political parties, should get their security clearances? I'll start with you, Mr. Singh. Maninder Singh.
I would probably go as far as saying that anyone possible that could get that clearance should try. At least we know what's going on. I wouldn't get into the semantics of like who and why or where, but we're watching closely, and we're quite concerned over the fact that we can be having very serious situations that are occurring in Canada. We have a lot of information that can be released. We see the Prime Minister and we see others that are actually speaking to the issue, so there is no muzzling that's going on if you are privy to the information that's being provided to you. So we would actually expect everyone, especially party leadership, to have that clearance. because then you can actually have a real conversation. When you don't get the clearance, one of the things that's being spoken about, I'll be very blunt, in the Sikh community is that people that don't want to know and then can actually walk away from a situation saying that, well, I never knew, that type of excuse is not going to fly. And I hope that's not what's going on. I don't pretend to know the inner workings of parties, but our expectation, I think, as Canadians, is that every party leader would have that clearance.
Mr. Balpreet Singh, I'm going to ask you the same question, and I'm assuming you're talking to, about Mr. Maninder Singh, about Mr. Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, who's refused to get a security clearance to have the full information, as he's the only leader who has refused that. Mr. Balpreet Singh, the same question to you.
I would concur. I think all party leaders should have that clearance and should receive that information. I mean, my initial inclination was that this information should be made public. We need to know which MPs are working for foreign governments. But I appreciate that there are intelligence considerations, and that's probably not going to happen. But at the very least, our party leaders should know so that they can take actions within their own parties.
Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Maninder Singh. You talked about one of the 4 things we need to do. You talked about support for anti-Sikh hate. You talked about, you believe, maybe MPs, and Mr. Balpreet Singh just mentioned you may go to your MP's office as well, so you're not sure who's actually serving you
10 seconds
when you
left.
go there. Does that provide you concern that leaders of the parties you cannot trust to support your community because they have not got the information or clearance? And I think is it concerning that members have made...
Your time is way up.
Okay.
Very, very quick answers from each of you, if you wish.
I don't think it breaches on trust. I think it just breaches on expectations, and it's disappointing that we can't have those conversations in relative safety. So I would answer it that way.
Okay, thank you. We go now. C'est maintenant Madame Michaud. Allez-y, s'il vous plaît, 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you to the witnesses for their excellent testimony and very, very significant for the Canadian government here. You also mentioned duty to warn, which is something that the Commissioner of the RCMP has mentioned when he appeared before this committee last Tuesday. He said that these situations are becoming more and more frequent, and at least over the course of the last year, intimidation, harassment, and he spoke of duty to warn. He explained to us what it was, and I was very surprised to learn. But it's only that. It's a duty to warn, but not a duty to protect or a responsibility to protect. Google News last June 23, 2023, mentioned that certain members of the RCMP have indicated that you were subject and target of various threats. When you sought to find out what kind of protection might be available to you from us, they sort of were responding, well, you're on your own. Were you surprised that the police can obtain this kind of information, tell you that they have this information, but then leave you sort of hanging? You have to change your lifestyle, your habits. Do you think that the police should be doing more to assist in your security?
If it was any person in this country that is facing this type of imminent threat of assassination, that a simple piece of paper that's left with you actually is taken back from you, and then you're kind of left on your own vices. It feels like a shift of liability. When we were sitting in that space, it felt like the duty to warn is really just felt like, now we've told you, and now if something happens to you, we can wash our hands of it. It's a horrible feeling for anyone living in this country. I hope no one in this room ever has to experience it. And my experience with it has been multiple times over the last 2 years. So I definitely think there needs to be more. And as the question was a similar question earlier on, I won't go too far into it, but I do believe there's things that we can do for the long game to ensure that Canadians don't have to go through this, that we can protect our borders, we can protect this country, we can protect the Sikh community in this country. And the one thing we shouldn't be looking at is silencing communities, that, hey, if you just went quiet on this issue, they would leave you alone. It's not just an issue of the Sikh community anymore. This is an issue of the territorial integrity and sovereignty of this country. And I think that has to be more apparent, that this is not a fight just between Sikhs and India anymore. It is now a fight, as we can see with the expulsion of diplomats, is a fight between Canada and India. So I think in the long term, I think we have to get to the root of the problem. But in the short term, like I mentioned before, there's not a lot that even we think that can happen. But what's happening right now is very limited, for sure.
Je vous remercie. Vous l'avez mentionné un peu plus tôt.
Thank you. You also mentioned that you, in fact, had to change many of your rights, and you said the one thing you must not do, and I will not do, is be silent. Do you feel safe in having come here today to testify before the committee?
The idea of safety is gone now. It doesn't really exist when these threats persist. So you do the best to protect yourself and those around you the best way you can. I don't walk down the street with anyone. I don't do a lot of things. But coming here to testify was a no-brainer. Living in this country, being born and raised here, watching the things that happened around me, looking at Indigenous rights, looking at people being allowed to voice themselves in this country and having disagreements. It's kind of the underlying fabric of what Canada is supposed to be. So coming here and testifying, I think for me, even if it was safe or not, I would have come into this building to testify. I don't know leaving this building with a imminent threat of assassination of what that means, but that's the reality of it. And when I said we wouldn't be silenced, that's what comes with it then, is that you take on that danger that the law enforcement agencies have told you about. But we're not going to let India come into our backyard and silence us here. We may have disagreements on the issues that we're advocating for, but we have a right to advocate for them.
Je vous remercie. Je me demande
Thank you very much. I wonder how you yourself and your committee reacted when the government, the RCMP, the CSIS did in fact release a bit of information on their investigation. Very unusual. It's unheard of to do that. Usually when there's an inquiry going on, it's no comment. It's under study. We'd like to know that as many people as possible would provide information to us if they have information. Was that in any way reassuring to the diaspora, to your community, to have it brought out in public from one day to the next? If the RCMP hadn't done this press conference, would it have changed anything?
I think if the RCMP hadn't done the press conference, I think there would still be a lot of questions. Every time Canada has come out to challenge India and make revelations about India, India has just gone into denial mode. So it helps Canadians, it helps the Sikh community in Canada know that they're being validated for their concerns. So the RCMP press conference, I think, was instrumental for our community to understand how deeply India is operating within Canada. And it's everyone, those of us that are supporters of Sikh sovereignty in Khalistan, those that are somewhere in the middle, and those that are just business owners that are being extorted. I think all of them felt a sense of relief when those revelations were made, that Canada is trying to move in the right direction. Our law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies are taking this threat seriously. So I think from that front, and I think the further expectation is what we're doing here right now is a big part of that as well. That people are watching in our community, that we have a study going on India and on these issues. I think those are all very important for the public to realize that their elected officials, their law enforcement agencies, and intelligence agencies are working in their interest.
Merci. Merci, Madame. We'll go to Mr. McGregor now for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Important study. This committee came together unanimously through the call of an emergency meeting, and we unanimously supported this study. So, and I think the revelations that were made on October 14th, like you said, these are things that the Sikh community in Canada has known about for the past number of decades. And I think finally the rest of Canada is waking up to the reality of the threat. And I hope there's some validation there now. I think the trick is to see that we can continue our efforts to meet this threat with the seriousness that it deserves. Earlier this week, we had both the RCMP commissioner and the director of CSIS here. And I want to touch on the issue of security clearances for federal party leaders, because when I asked the director of CSIS, the new director of CSIS, Mr. Daniel Rogers, about their perspective on federal party leaders getting security clearances, he said that it would basically allow federal leaders to be more aware and that they could take appropriate actions within their own parties. So maybe I'll start with you, Mr. Maninder Singh. I don't think this is really about gagging federal party leaders. I think this is about equipping them with the ability to take actions so that Canadians can have confidence in the next election that no one is running under a party banner who might be compromised. Do you have an idea, like when the CSIS director is talking about actions that a properly briefed federal party leader can take, do you have some suggestions on what that could be? I think we're just trying to get this on the record because we ultimately want to make sure that our electoral processes are secure no matter what party you belong to.
I think we definitely have thoughts when we're seeing into all these things unfold. And one of them being that as in that India watches and manipulates this type of information all the time. So when our elected leadership in the country is not on the same page on an issue of national security, I think it sends a very wrong message internationally. India is able to utilize this, and they have utilized it. If we can be very frank and clear, a party leader not getting security clearance has been just blown out of proportion within the Indian media. That basically that this party, the Conservative Party, and Mr. Poilievre are standing up for the truth, which is Indian truth, and everyone else is a Khalistani extremist supporter. Now, it's a horrible way of painting this entire country and all of its government and elected officials and its people, and including the Sikh community. But that's what India is doing with it. So my kind of reservation in the whole situation is that if we don't understand as average people living in this country why a security clearance is not being taken, I think there's a huge gap along the way as to what's happening, because we are watching others that are speaking very openly about this issue, and they have that security clearance. And that's where I think the confusing part comes in for average people like us, is that we're not understanding what's happening and why that wouldn't happen. And the automatic linkage is somebody trying to protect the interests of India in this country. And whether that's the case or not, that's the perception. And that's where I think perception is like 90% of the problem here. And we need to understand this better as average people, and I don't think we've got enough information yet.
Yeah, no, I think most people watching this would agree that it's time to put the interests of Canada ahead of political parties' partisan interests, to have a united front on this. And I'll just add, that was the CSIS director, the current one. His comments are echoed by previous CSIS directors, previous CSIS executives, previous national security advisors. I mean, these are all veterans with many years of experience in our national intelligence and security agencies, who are in lockstep saying that all federal party leaders should get that clearance. And Mr. Balpreet Singh, maybe I'll turn the floor to you. Would you like to add anything from your perspective on the same question?
I think from day one, our community has said that this issue shouldn't be politicized. We should all be united against foreign interference. And right now we're dealing with a hostile foreign country, India, that is killing Canadian citizens, running criminal gangs, extorting, arson, all of it. I mean, it's unprecedented as far as I'm concerned. No other country has even come close. But India is using this issue as a wedge, trying to find friends, as it were, amongst Canadian politicians who might be seen as soft on the India issue, and maybe, things can go back to the way they were just a few years ago, or even just a couple years ago. So I think that all of our political leaders should have the security clearance, and not having that clearance at this point, I would go so far as to say it's willful blindness.
Thank you. And a final question to you, Mr. Maninder Singh. The NCCOP report that came out, the redacted version, referred to Canada as being a low-risk, high-reward environment for our foreign adversaries to operate in. Very quickly, how do you think we flip those terms so that it becomes a high-risk, low-reward environment for our foreign adversaries?
I think for a country like India, which is basically, for me, is an enemy state right now for what they're doing in Canada. I don't know what else could be more defined as an enemy state than somebody that's coming here killing Canadians on Canadian soil. So for me, it would be actually understanding them. If it's low risk to them, that means they know they can come here, they can kill people, they can extort people, they can meddle in our governmental affairs, our elections, they can manipulate everything from our media to other spaces as well. And they've been doing it without any type of retribution or fear of any type of retribution. So my thinking would be is that until we understand them, and I'll go back to the inquiry, to understand how they've been operating, to understand them much more deeply, I think there's no other way to do it. And to find out why successive governments have allowed them to get to this point, I think is key in this, that this just didn't happen overnight. This is a decades-long process that has brought us to this point right now where, if people are being killed in this country because India wants them dead for their activism, but they're not violating any Canadian law and just exercising their charter rights, I think that is, like Balpreet Singh said, we cannot politicize that issue. It has to be a firm issue of solidarity amongst all Canadians, amongst all Canadian political parties to stand up to India. But I think it starts by understanding them, their motives, and where our gaps and failures have been, and that's only done through an inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. We'll start our second round of questions now with Mr. Shipley. Mr. Shipley, go ahead. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today and listening to your opening remarks. Thank you for your bravery and what you're still doing. My first question is for both of you gentlemen, please. We know that Canada has seen a drastic rise in extortions attempts, particularly targeting the South Asian community in Ontario, BC, and Alberta. Can you explain to the committee the nature of these extortion attempts? And can you provide some examples of how these attempts play out and the tactics that are used to intimidate individuals in your communities?
Just by saying that primarily targeting the Sikh community and the Punjabi community versus the South Asian community at large. So I would like to point that out. The second part of that is how it actually plays out. What we've seen in multiple kind of reports that have come out is that India is using these nexus of gangs, individuals that might even be in prison in India that have been given a free-for-all to kind of go out and extort people out here. Now that extortion happens when people have entered this country and they've started into criminal activity, or they came here with the intention of conducting criminal activity. And those people then organize. They're coordinated through Indian proxies and middle persons that are within the communities and the areas that you've set out. And they're being coordinated through both the Indian consulate offices in Canada and along with their gang nexus as well. So when they go to somebody as a business person and they say, give us $300,000 or we're going to get you, we're going to kill you, we're going to do this to you, they burn down a townhouse complex they're building. They burn down a house they're building as business people. They shoot up their home where they have their family and their kids at home. And people have been known to give extraordinary amounts of money in the millions of dollars to try to protect themselves. They're afraid of going to law enforcement because they've been told not to. And I think that speaks to the fact that they don't think they're safe. So I think that's a very brief way of kind of putting it to your question as to how the whole thing operates. But it's a very elaborate way of India, their Indian consulates, their diplomats that have been expelled, and a nexus of gangs and individuals they brought over here to do their dirty work for them.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Balpreet Singh, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things. So the extortion comes in two different forms. One is a smaller level. It's not about money. It's about behavior. So getting documents signed by individuals saying that they believe in, the unity, integrity of India, and then threatening them that they would make that public or making other statements that they've signed public. That's one way of forcing people, or saying that you won't get a visa or your family might be threatened. All of this is a smaller level of extortion, but the game plan for the multi-million-dollar type of extortion is to paint Canada as an unsafe country to further a narrative. And in that situation, we're seeing businesses being asked for amounts that they simply can't pay. And the real purpose is to strike terror. And like I said, in June 2022, I had pointed out that this gang war narrative might be used to target Sikhs because that's what happens. The Indian media and state put out these narratives, and then they create the events on the ground to support those narratives. So that's what we're seeing here, that Canada is unsafe, it's overrun by Khalistani extremists and gangs and Punjabi gangs, and they make that a reality.
Thank you for those answers. Obviously, we're hearing a situation where there's got to be great fear in your community over these situations and these extortion attempts, and not just all attempts. Some of them are successful, unfortunately. A while ago, our Conservative colleague Tim Uppal brought forward a private member's bill to try to help address this issue and to address the dramatic rise in extortion offenses. And in this private member's bill, there was going to be parts to establish mandatory minimum penalties for the offense of extortion, establish a mandatory minimum penalty for the extortion to capture all instances of extortion committed for the benefit of, at the direction of, or in association with a criminal organization. It was also to restore the mandatory minimum penalty of 4 years for the offense of extortion with a non-restricted firearm, and also to establish arson. And earlier you mentioned there was some definitely arson.
Mr. Shipley, could you wrap it up? Good.
I'm only at 4 minutes 30 seconds, so I think I've.
Okay. Our timing is a little off here.
So sorry about that. I was just about through to my end there. And our last point was to establish arson as an aggravating factor for the charge of extortion. You had mentioned definitely arson as part of this extortion. This was voted against by both the Liberals and the NDP, as was put forward by our Conservative colleague Tim Uppal. Do you not think having harsher penalties would make your community feel a little safer in these instances? I know we're almost out of time, so maybe I'll just go to Mr. Balpreet Singh and ask for his comments on it.
To be honest, I'm not completely familiar with the motion. I mean, in theory, I think it's absolutely true that there need to be penalties for this sort of behavior. And one of the things that was mentioned before, why is Canada a soft target? The reason is that you can engage in espionage here. You can pass names on, video on, surveil people, and there's no penalties for it. Now, Germany has tried Indian agents, and that has had, I believe, a chilling effect. But here in Canada, there are absolutely no consequences to the type of behavior India is engaging in.
Thank you, Mr. Shipley. We go now to Mr. Gahir for 5 minutes, please.
Great, thank you, Chair. I'm just a little bit disappointed from the line of questioning. It's on. I'm just a little bit disappointed from the line of questioning from my colleague, Mr. Shipley. We know that mandatory minimum penalties are not going to stop the Indian state from engaging in the activities that they're doing. We also increased the maximum penalty for extortion as well, and obviously that's not going to stop India, but that is something that our government obviously implemented. I want to thank both witnesses for appearing in this committee. We've seen that whenever the Prime Minister has spoken about this issue, both last year and again this year, and when the RCMP has spoken about this issue of Indian interference in Canada, we've seen this flood of misinformation and rightfully disinformation that emanates from India, from their media sources, from their government. Can you speak about the dangers of that disinformation? Because, you know, I may look at that and see it as disinformation for what it is, but I guess the worry that I have is if that is then quoted by international sources, it receives a primer of legitimacy. That's my worry. So I wanted both of you to talk about that. Balpreet, maybe you first?
Sure. So this is a real problem. We see Indian narratives that are parroted by Western media, Canadian media, and that was the case during the 2018 Trudeau visit to India, that this narrative of so-called Sikh extremism was used to completely taint that entire visit, but it was completely based on a false Indian narrative based on planted stories. Currently, we are seeing many of the similar things. India creates a narrative and puts out false news, and then, frankly, puts Canadian lives at risk. We have seen an individual here in Canada, I won't use the name, but he has completely, absolutely nothing to do with any sort of extremism or anything else, but his address and his name and his picture have been put into Indian media as a so-called Sikh extremism. He's afraid of living at home. He can't sell his home because the house is now a tainted property. But this information is just absolutely crazy, and I think there needs to be steps by Canada to point it out, because it's just, Canadian consumers of this are also very large. Indian media is read by Canadians as well, so something needs to be done about that.
To that, the disinformation and misinformation also leads to a polarizing of communities within Canada, which is a very unfortunate situation we're finding ourselves in now. This is not a fight between Sikhs and Hindus in India. This is not a fight between Sikhs and another community or another community and another community. This is actually a struggle now for those that believe in the sovereignty of this country in protecting it from rogue actors like India. That is the actual fight that we're facing right now. So the misinformation and disinformation, it polarizes communities. There's hate crimes that are committed, which we're seeing a rise in against the Sikh community as well. It was why I mentioned it in one of the 4 asks that we'll be taking forward as well around resources to kind of strengthen communities, build those bridges again. So that misinformation and disinformation, while there's opportunities for media outlets to run with it, the impact on the ground we're seeing is that there's a polarizing of clashes between communities in larger diaspora communities in Surrey, Brampton, and other spaces. We're seeing them polarize. We're seeing hate crimes on the rise against the Sikh community because India's misinformation and disinformation, it's not only just in media and through their media, it's on social media. And social media, as you all know, is just a horrendous space for people to be ill-informed and misinformed very, very quickly. So I think the threat of it is very real, and countering it, I think, has been a huge problem for us in Canada.
No, and you both raised great points, so thank you for that. Can you speak a little bit about the level of infiltration that the Sikh community feels or knows has been happening in Canada or in other Sikh, in other countries where there is a big Sikh diasporas? I referenced a Washington Post article that made reference to a news outlet in Germany that ran a pro-separatist paper, a pro-Sikh separatist paper. And they were actually charged, the owner of the paper was actually charged by the German government because they were then leaking information of their sources to the Indian government itself. So on the face of it, they're pro-separatist, but behind the scenes, they're leaking that information to the Indian government, and they were charged by the German government with a criminal penalty. Can you speak about that level of infiltration that you hear conversations about, that you've seen maybe?
The infiltration starts in our gurdwaras, in our places of worship, in our community organizations, and it influences and impacts Punjabi-based media, and also politicians from Punjabi Sikh backgrounds that are actually entering any level of government as well. And the way that India does that is through its consulate offices, the coercion and visa denials. You have the same individuals that are acting as Indian proxies. If somebody's visa is denied, for example, they're told to come into the Indian consulate. They go to the Indian consulate through a middle person who is probably more than likely the individual that has provided enough intelligence to get that person's visa canceled in the first place. And then when they are reissued a visa, they are made to bend the knee. Balpreet Singh spoke about signing certain types of letters denouncing Sikh separatism or the Khalistan movement, or on the flip side promoting Mr. Modi and his fascist regime in India, that you promote them. And these are individuals usually that are within community leadership spaces and roles. So I think those are the individuals they target more than anyone. But the infiltration, it runs deep through media, ethnic media, through gurdwaras and places of worship, Sikh organizations, all the way through to politicians that are in any walk of government that are trying to make a difference. So I think India moves to counter and influence
Sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off there. Thank you. On y va maintenant, Madame Michaud. 2 minutes.
2.5 minutes for Madame Michaud. Thank you, Chair. In September 2003, the Press Association had published on the social media an article on seeking transparency from the part of the government from the collaboration of the opposition parties.
Interference.
I have a lot of respect for my colleagues, and it's very, very unusual to, throw barbs at the opposition because they're should be doing this or should not be doing that. But it's been touched on in a number of the. Do you think we've learned any lessons? Since the publication of that news article? We were discussing it today, of course, but the RCMP, the intelligence agencies, the commission studying the project. Do you think if it was less partisan and more cohesive, that it might be a progressive move?
I believe that we have made progress since then. I will say this very quickly, that the political jockeying and positioning that goes on between political parties, like, we're not a part of that, nor is that a reason why we're in this room. We see it, we watch it, we know what's going on. We're trying to stick to the topic always, and I have no partisan views towards any political leader or political party for that matter. But to your question, I believe that we have made progress. Should we have made it a long time ago? Probably. I think there's been a lot of failures since the last decade or so that we've been in that has led us to this point. And I think that that's the biggest thing that we have to kind of look at, is that what got us here in the first place. And I think there's been failures along the way and gaps along the way that we have to be better. But I think in the last year or so, we have seen movement. We have seen some things from our law enforcement agencies. We have seen big steps with the expulsion of diplomats. So I believe that there have been positive steps for sure.
Merci.
Merci, Madame. We'll go now to Mr. McGregor for 2 minutes and a half, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. I'd like to ask a question of both of you. I'll start with you, Mr. Maninder Singh. The Parliament of Canada came together in quite rapid fashion in the summer to pass Bill C-70, which updated a lot of our laws, including bringing the CSIS Act up to speed to operate in a digital world. But there were also some significant amendments to the Security of Information Act to really provide a lot more legislative flexibility in targeting clandestine foreign interference operations. I know, like, from CBC News, from some of their sources, they've reported that India's clandestine operations remain largely in place, and that it may be some time before we dismantle those. But, when you've seen what Canada's Parliament has done, and the fact that there is now this attention on the Indian government, are you optimistic that we are on a path towards finally confronting this? Do you remain optimistic given all of your personal experiences?
I think hope and optimism isn't an option. Action is the only way. I think being hopeful and optimistic, I think that's just something that's ingrained within us, of being in high spirits all the time, no matter what we're facing as individuals, as Sikhs. So I will carry that with me always, but that doesn't resolve the fact that action has to be taken. So when we see certain things happening, and then we have reports saying that India's clandestine activities, they're relatively unchecked and they're still continuing forward, it begs the question that legislation is passed, but there's action behind it. So what are we going to do? And we are calling for that inquiry, because I don't believe we fully understand their ability here and their networks and what they've actually set up. And if they're able to continue after all of this, that means that we have a gap somewhere, or several gaps within law enforcement or security intelligence, and their operatives are still here, or they've got such a huge operation running here that it's going to take some time to dismantle. But I believe we definitely need to check that.
And sorry to interrupt, I just want very quickly to Mr. Balpreet Singh, just from your perspective from the World Sikh Organization, are there any important lessons that Canada can learn from Indian interference in other countries, things that they're doing well, the nature of the threat, et cetera?
No, I think we're in uncharted territory right now. India is for the first time exposed to quite an extent. But what India has done consistently over the past 40 years is say, well, India is such a large market, and it's this pesky small community of Sikhs that, if you can deal with them, then we'll open our markets up, and, we can buy your pulses and whatnot. We cannot be trading our human rights for economic growth and trade. We have to obviously keep our doors open for trade, but it can't be at the expense of human rights. And I think that's what we've seen over the past 40 years. The Sikh concerns have been ignored, and we pussyfooted with India because we didn't want to offend them, because that might affect our political and economic relations. That's got to be reevaluated.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. So we'll do our final 2 slots in this round at 4 minutes apiece. So Ms. Dancho, please go ahead, 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again to the witness testimony. Mr. Maninder Singh, I wanted to ask you a bit more. You talked a lot about the duty to warn. When did you start receiving these? You said you received multiple. Can you share a time frame of when these started happening?
The first ones were in July of 2022. It was approximately a few days after Mr. Ripudaman Singh Malik was killed in Surrey, BC. Myself, Mr. Nijjar, 3 others in Surrey were immediately given duty to warrants within days. One of the reasons those duty to warrants may have popped up, which is much more apparent now, is that multiple Indian newspaper media outlets had published our names as individuals that may have been involved in the murder of Mr. Malik, which is absolutely just BS at the end of the day. And but they wanted to show that there was a row in the community. And after Mr. Nijjar's death, I received my second duty to warn. And that was actually also broadcast in the media that it was supporters of Mr. Malik that may have killed Mr. Nijjar. And this is the way that they wanted to run this whole operation is that they wanted to show that this was an inter-community battle. They were wanting to remove Sikh leadership from this country. And then they had multiple other threats, which after the indictment in the U.S. opened up, was very clear that it wasn't just going to be limited to Mr. Nijjar, Mr. Pannu, and others. It was going to be a whole bunch of other Sikh leadership in Canada, especially, that was going to be eliminated. So those duty to warns came like in multiple forms. I've had regular kind of conversations with law enforcement, with INSET, with CSIS around concerns within the community and potentially concerns they may have with me and my moving around the way I do. So I think that you get the duty to warns, and for me it was at very interesting times. It was after the murder of 2 Sikhs in Canada that I received both of those warnings, and they're continuing till now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. I appreciate your perspective, your experience, and that you shared it. You mentioned the U.S. indictment. The Americans were able to thwart the murder, and with that indictment, I'm wondering if you feel that there are things that the Americans did to prevent the murder that we could be doing moving forward to ensure that more Mr. Nijjars, for example, are not murdered. I take issue with the fact that we weren't able to stop those murders from happening from a foreign government. Our party obviously cares very deeply about this country, and foreign interference is a serious issue that is deeply assaulting to all of us. And to see it from India to get to such an extent that individuals are being murdered in Canada is completely unacceptable. So it is frustrating as a Canadian to see that another country was able to stop murders and ours was not. Do you have any feedback of what we could be doing better so that we can stop future ones? And I appreciate that the recent announcement addressed 13 individuals who were in peril, and so our hope is that those individuals are no longer in peril, but we're not sure if that is the case. So any further information you can provide in your perspective would be welcome.
I think the way the United States is set up with their interests first, taking care of their country, their citizens, I think that's something that we don't understand where, as citizens of this country, where our interests are right now. As Balpreet Singh stated, is it with the human rights and right to life and freedoms that we have in this country, or is it with keeping India as a strong partner? And that is something that only this Foreign Interference Commission, this study, and other actions that the government will take in the coming months will actually show us as to where do they put Canadian lives versus relationship with India. Treating India with padded gloves versus framing Russia and China as hostile actors. I don't believe we have seen the same level of violence inflicted upon Canada and Canadians that India has done. So I think right now, before when I mentioned that action is going to speak, and I think an inquiry, I will keep coming back to that because we don't understand the enemy. We don't understand what they've done here, and we don't understand how deeply they've been infiltrated. And without knowing that, in a very, very strong sense, remove activities, like Mr. McGregor mentioned, they'll just continue. And we'll keep putting on Band-Aid solutions, and we won't actually protect Canadians.
Thank you, Ms. Dancho. We go now to Mr. Sarai for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Both of you were born and raised in Canada, by my understanding. I've seen you both for decades work as activists for human rights of not only Sikh Canadians, but also others. I know you've both been very active on Indigenous rights. I know Balpreet Singh has done a lot of work for Jewish groups, for Muslim groups, for other impoverished groups, and I know you've done, Maninder Singh, a lot for Indigenous groups. When we talk about human rights, Balpreet just mentioned a very important point that sometimes governments trade off human rights of another country versus trade. In this case, we're talking about the human rights of Canadians, not the citizens of another country, which is really appalling that it's stepped into not only the other country, but which we've always known, but now right here in Canada. So for that, I give you courage and commendation for standing up despite that. My first question is going to be to you, Maninder Singh. Can you speak about the weeks, months ahead of, prior to Hardeep Singh Nijjar's death, where there was a lot of rumors around and even after about organized crimes calling for a hit for Mr. Nijjar. And in fact, I got my information from people like you and others before the Prime Minister unveiled it in September. Whisper, as Balpreet Singh said, a whisper that it was Indian involvement in this. Can you share some light in what you felt that beyond that would go into a trial situation?
Yeah, it's just my nature that I have to correct things. I've given nothing and done nothing for the Indigenous communities. They've provided us with everything in this country. So I just want to put that out there. As much as we could do, we could never do enough to reconcile for what's happened here. On the actual question, the months and weeks leading up to Mr. Nijjar's assassination, there was a lot of information that was just in the community. It was he was warned days before by law enforcement that his life was at risk. He was supposed to be meeting with intelligence a day after he was killed for more briefings as well. But he was continuously warned for a year. We got our warnings in July of 2022. He was the only one amongst us 5 that was repeatedly receiving those warnings. But he kept saying the same thing from every stage that he spoke on, that he had the right to speak, that he would not go silent, that he had the right to speak. If people didn't like what he was saying, that was a different thing. And that happened right up until the day of his assassination on June 18th, 2023 at approximately 12 p.m., so just a few hours before he was gunned down, is that he actually stated from the stage that I may not survive, that people should move on with the struggle. Don't go quiet. You have a duty to your people to speak out. And that's kind of like what we remember about him. And that's why I think one of the reasons I'm in this room is because of him. And I think a lot of us are here because that is the catalyst that all brought us into this space now, with the revelations that kind of came out of that. So I think it was, I think the community felt a bit helpless. And when we look back at that moment and we look at him, did we do enough to protect him? Did we do enough as a community? But then we have to get out of that to think about, like, well, for a year he was kept getting warnings and warnings and warnings and no one did anything. So that's where we come back to the failures, as we have one side of it. India will continue to attack, but are we in Canada prepared to thwart those attacks? And I think at the moment I would have to say no.
20 seconds.
30 seconds?
20.
20? Look, we're in the last round of questions, and I'm pretty appalled, and I don't want to make this political, but 3 parties have asked questions about India's direct involvement in foreign interference, which is the nature of this study, but there's one party who has asked nothing about India's involvement and their role. Does that alarm you? If you were white or if you're a different color, would you not expect to have the same level of respect, or if it was Russia or if it was Iran? But do you feel offended? Because I personally do feel offended.
I never feel offended. I just figure out how to move forward. Like, I have to respect everyone in this room as elected officials. Somebody elected them to be in this room. The expectations of us as people living in this country is that wouldn't be the case. That racism and discrimination is not at play here, I would hope. I definitely would. My mind isn't going there. My mind is focused on who out of this room will help us in the future. And that's what we're going to be working towards. The commentary here is momentary, although I will say that as in, like, I ended my 5 minutes with, please ask me questions about India. Because I watched what happens for the last 2 days, and I don't think enough questions were asked by certain individuals in this room about India specifically.
Thank you, gentlemen. So that ends this round. Thank you to the witnesses for being here, and we appreciate your testimony and the risks you run on a daily basis. So thank you for your efforts. With that, we will suspend and bring in the next panel. Thank you.
Given that Canada's specificity, we can perhaps expect moral support from Canada's partners without hoping for legal proceedings or sanctions against India. Among the 13 Indo-Pacific strategies identified, India is mentioned as a strategic partner several times, but for Canada, it's an uncertain ally. Now, among this diaspora, a first recommendation, without having any pretension that we are going to interfere with anything Canada may do, first recommendation, move forward on Bill C-377, which amends the Criminal Code to prohibit hate speech at religious ceremonies, such as processions or festivals. Thus, to allow, because all our prime ministers have gone to Punjab, and some will take a look at the particularity of the Sikh community. Now, this will be amplified under the Trudeau regime, and it might be perhaps preferable for the Canadian Prime Minister to go to Punjab, although I'm not indicating Canada must do this. That's it. Thank you.
Work to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, thanks, and happy Halloween to everyone. I'd like to use my time to provide some insights into the role of India's Foreign Intelligence Service in the conduct of covert operations abroad. I know that a question was asked about this in the committee's last meeting, and Mr. Rogers, the new CSIS director, said that he couldn't provide any details. The name of that service is the Research and Analysis Wing, or RAW. It operates from within the Prime Minister's office, is subject to direction from the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, and is not publicly or judicially accountable for its actions. RAW sometimes enjoys heroic treatment within Indian popular culture as a defender of Indian security. RAW has a long history, tracing its roots back to a British-run organization during the period of the Raj. After Indian independence, it was reformulated but struggled to attain any real professional capacity. It was significantly reformed and founded as RAW in 1968. For decades, the focus of its foreign operations was in intelligence gathering targeting regional geopolitical adversaries, China and Pakistan in particular. But from the late 1980s, RAW began to turn its attention to a different sort of perceived enemy, advocates of the Khalistan separatist movement. RAW slowly began to push its covert operations targeting Khalistani activists outwards from India's near abroad, where it devoted special attention to operations in Pakistan. And some of these methods that it had deployed in Pakistan have now been exported to the West, to the United States and Canada, to elements of the Sikh diaspora living further afield. RAW posts officers under diplomatic cover to Indian embassies and consulates abroad. The power that RAW possesses as an independent arm of the Prime Minister's conduct of global diplomacy gives it sway over India's diplomatic corps and means that it can deploy India's foreign ministry officials as dutiful instruments in intelligence collection and the support for the conduct of covert operations. RAW, in my view, has joined the ranks of the Russian SVR and FSB and the Chinese MSS as posing a critical national security threat to Canada. In September 2023, as members of this committee will know, the Prime Minister made an announcement in the House of Commons regarding credible allegations held by Canadian security agencies of a potential link between agents of the Government of India and the killing of a Canadian citizen. On the same day, the Foreign Minister, Melanie Joly, announced that Canada had expelled a top Indian diplomat. In a press briefing, the minister confirmed that the Indian diplomat who had been PNG'd was actually the head of RAW's India's RAW office in Canada. His name was Pavan Kumar Ray. A little over a year later, immediately following the RCMP press conference that has stimulated this committee's study, it was announced that 6 Indian diplomats, including the Indian High Commissioner, were being expelled from Canada. The expulsion was part and parcel of an effort to urgently disrupt violent Indian foreign interference in Canada by breaking the chain between Indian diplomats collecting covert intelligence and the transmission of this information to proxy agents and criminal gangs operating within Canada to engage in intimidation, harassment, and murder. This is a clear illustration of how Indian diplomats are being drawn into the RAW network of covert operations abroad. What is to be done? The activities of RAW in Canada require a strong counterintelligence response by CSIS and CSE in particular, in association with GAC and the RCMP. The task before these agencies is to identify RAW officials, monitor their activities, and disrupt them whenever possible. Known or suspected RAW officers can be refused visas and diplomatic accreditation and kept out of the country. Those discovered to be engaged in covert foreign interference can be expelled. Proxy networks can be disrupted, investigated, and charged. But this is not an easy task, and our agencies will need the resources and expertise to do this job. It requires a coordinated and sustained effort. Canada must also use every opportunity to leverage its membership in the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance to benefit from shared intelligence on RAW operations globally. And Canada also needs to mobilize a broad diplomatic national security coalition of allies, starting but not ending with Washington, to put constant pressure on the highest levels of the Modi government to force a stop to intolerable Indian covert operations. Much of this pressure campaign will, of necessity, operate away from the public eye, but on occasion, publicity might help, as the RCMP clearly believes in terms of their recent press conference. There's much more to be done, including through law enforcement, outreach to the South Asian community, more national security, strategic transparency to make Canadians as a whole aware of the threat. And we must conduct a harder-edge, pragmatic diplomacy towards India, not overinvest in India as a counterweight to China, a role that recent events such as the BRICS meeting suggest it may not be interested in playing. But the counterintelligence effort is foundational, and it's one that typically our security and intelligence agencies have underinvested in the past. Thank you.
We'll start our first round of questions with Ms. Dancho. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you to the witnesses for being here and for your expert testimony. Mr. Wark, I'll start with you. I appreciated your insight on RAW, and in particular when you mentioned, our leverage with the Five Eyes intelligence. I was wondering, could you enlighten the committee? When we heard from Nathalie Drouin and the Deputy Minister the other day, we understood then that there were a number of attempts of Canada to meet with India to discuss this. We were brushed off, we were stood up, we had visas denied, all types of excuses for not being met with. Can you tell the committee from your experience or your thoughts on why does India feel so comfortable brushing us off like that? It just seems quite insulting.
It's a good question, Ms. Dancho, and I thank you for it. I think there are two things at play here. One is that India believes that it can be more muscular in its approach to Canada, and as you say, brush us off and frankly treat senior Canadian officials with extraordinary degrees of contempt. They believe simply that they have the power to do that. And I would say as well that India is, I've described this before, as being stuck in what I call a plausible deniability box. And they're finding it difficult to get out of that box in terms of taking responsibility or being accountable for some of the covert operations that they've been linked to. They are in an embarrassing position, I would say, with regard to the United States in terms of having been forced by the U.S. to agree to an investigation into covert operations conducted against American citizens. They would like to be able to treat Canada differently, so bend to the United States, not bend to Canada, as a way of, frankly, saving face while the Indian government figures out a real escape route from its past practices.
So, Mr. Wark, they feel very confident not treating they wouldn't feel as confident treating the United States that way. Would they feel as confident treating the UK that way, for example, or another of our Five Eyes? It seems that it's Canada, but perhaps it's not just Canada.
Well, what we've seen, Ms. Dancho, is that these kinds of covert operations, which I suggest were first conducted at scale in Pakistan by RAW, have been exported to the West, including to the UK, including to Germany, the United States, obviously. We know one case in particular there, and to Canada. India will approach each of these countries and the ties with them, selectively on a case-by-case basis. There are particular frictions, of course, given past history between India and Britain. But a recognition, I think, on the part of India that both Britain and Germany are, in many respects, significant powers in ways that Canada is not in their eyes. So They have seen, certainly in the past, Canada as a power that they can push around on the global stage, and a power that it makes sense for them in terms of domestic politics. And their official line that successive Canadian governments never take seriously their concerns about violent extremism abroad targeting their country. They've made Canada, frankly, a bit of a target. And it will be, in my view, very interesting to see how they respond next to a forceful pushback, as I would call it, by the Canadian authorities.
Thank you. As I mentioned, you'd also, in your opening remarks, talked about the Five Eyes alliance that we have to share intelligence. My understanding with the way that works is we get out of the Five Eyes what we put in. So for contributing intelligence, we'll get a relatively same degree back. And my understanding as well is that Five Eyes certainly can provide us a lot of intelligence to kind of tip us off of what may be going on here. So it's critical that we have a strong presence there and are contributing. Do you feel that Canada is contributing to the level that they should be? Are we getting the most that we can out of this, or should we be doing more?
I think a lot of our Five Eyes partners would like to see Canada do more, frankly, and this has been expressed from time to time, particularly in terms of certain kinds of capacities to collect intelligence globally. There have been, from time to time, criticisms directed at Canada that we do not have, for example, a foreign intelligence service, unlike all of our other Five Eyes partners. And that's an area where Canada continues to face pressure. I think where Canada is highly regarded as a partner within the Five Eyes is in regard to its signals intelligence capabilities in terms of foreign intelligence collection, cybersecurity. Also regarded as a useful partner in terms of the kinds of strategic intelligence assessments that we can share with our Five Eyes partners, and that Canadian view is often regarded as a useful sort of touch point for other countries to consider how they're looking at global threats. In terms of your opening remark about the Five Eyes being a kind of equal trading relationship, the reality is it's never been that. The United States is by far and away the largest and greatest intelligence power in the Five Eyes. Other countries try and make their contribution, but we get a lot more out of the Five Eyes than we can put in, and no one has ever suggested that we should have a kind of equal trading relation in terms of intelligence there.
Thank you. And certainly we've had a number of extraordinary witnesses from government, and it seems like they're working very hard to do more than we even know to keep this country safe. And of course, we're very proud of our intelligence agents and operators. But I do feel that I do take issue when we get criticisms from security officials around the world calling Canada a free rider, whether it's on defense or intelligence gathering. And so just with my few seconds, just more advice from you of what Canada can be doing to elevate our position to support us from being, in essence, bullied by foreign countries.
Again, I think a tougher diplomatic response to various forms of Indian aggression and a more robust capability, especially I would come back to the question of how well positioned are we really to conduct significant penetrating counterintelligence operations against Indian officials in Canada. We have the laws to allow us to do that. But CSIS as an organization these days is overstretched. The RCMP is certainly. And India would never have been regarded as a principal counterintelligence mission for the Canadian community until recently. So there's going to have to be a surge of capabilities and talent into that area. It may take time to achieve it. But I suspect the recognition is there, but there's probably going to be a gap between understanding that there's a new kind of counterintelligence mission that has to be performed and the ability to perform it fully.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dancho. We go now to Ms. DeMoff for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to both of our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Work, I said to you, you need a frequent flyer card for the number of times you come to this committee over the years. My first question is to both of you, and it's a fairly simple one. Do you think all of the leaders in the House should get a top secret security clearance to get briefings on this issue and any others that impact the national security of the country?
I'm happy to go first. Thank you for the question, Ms. Danoff. I should just say that I'll preview a submission that I'm writing on behalf of the Center for International Governance Innovation to the Foreign Interference Inquiry. And one of the recommendations we're going to offer to Justice Hogue is precisely this, that it would be beneficial for all leaders of opposition parties to have a top secret clearance and to be briefed by officials from the security and intelligence community beneficial for two reasons: to expand their understanding of national security threats, not just foreign interference, but a wide range of them, to expand that understanding and allow them to perform the mission that they will all have of holding the government to account. And secondly, and we've heard much about this in this committee and in other fora, to enhance their ability to understand the potentially direct impacts of foreign interference within their own caucuses. So yes.
Thank you. And Mr. Granger?
Yes, my answer would be yes, also for two reasons. First of all, it's always important to know exactly the issues about national security you're dealing with, especially with India. Second, also, when will be the next trip of a Canadian Prime Minister in India? I think he should be aware of who's surrounding him, making sure that this trip goes smoothly, because if you compare to other trips in the past, I would say there were some mishaps. And also, it's the message that we're going through India when we travel there as a prime minister, representative of not only political parties, but of Canada. And this is why also the obsession of always visiting Punjab maybe should be questioned. Because this is a way of, I would say, I would not say confronting India, it's an own homeland, but for sure it does not make them very comfortable when they have this type of visits. And it celebrates basically it fragilizes in a certain way their perception of their own unity. So I would say that, yes, everybody should be aware of what they're doing. And also all the leaders of the political parties should know exactly who's dealing with our relations with India. And within their party, and also, of course, within the different ministries.
Thank you. I'm going to give the rest of my time to Mr. Gahir.
Great. Thank you. So my questions are to Mr. Warwick. Dr. Warwick, India proclaims itself as the world's largest democracy. Is it normal for a democracy to have a foreign intelligence service that operates within its executive, within its PMO, that is practically answerable only to the Prime Minister in a direct line of chain, and a chain of command, that does not face parliamentary oversight, doesn't face public oversight, and doesn't really face any judicial oversight? Is that normal for a democracy to have that kind of a service?
It's an excellent question, sir, and the answer, I suspect you know, which is absolutely anomalous among democracies. I think democracies have learned a lesson over the last many decades that it is important for their intelligence services to be accountable publicly to their parliaments, not just accountable to their executives. And mechanisms have been set up in this country and others, of course, to achieve that, whether it's review bodies or parliamentary committees and so on. To have an intelligence service that reports secretly and operates secretly as the arm of a prime minister is, frankly, an authoritarian model.
Great, thank you. My other question is, you mentioned that India is now seen for potentially what it is, as a flawed democracy, that it's not this perfect counterbalance to China, which is what the West was hoping it would be. And just your views on maybe that aspect first.
Certainly, I mean, I don't regard myself as a kind of expert on Canadian-Indian diplomatic relations. I think it was very clear in the Indo-Pacific strategy that the Global Affairs produced that there was a lot of hope invested in being able to develop closer ties between Canada and India, both on the economic front, but also on the security front, and to hope that India would serve as a counterweight to China. I think those economic hopes remain, and understandably so, that we can continue to be a strong economic trading partner with India. I think, hopes around India, being willing to perform, if you like, in the Western camp in terms of geopolitical tensions in the Indo-Pacific region, I think are diminishing rapidly. And I think the idea that a country like Canada can engage in national security cooperation on various fronts with a country like India has been exploded entirely.
Okay, thank you. Do I have more time, or?
You have 50 seconds.
Okay, no, I have another question. So you mentioned that as this investigation comes out, obviously the U.S. has an indictment system where more information, more evidence has been presented already, and we see a fuller picture of the activities that India engages in internationally, especially against the Sikh diaspora. Domestically, though, within India, I'm seeing certain reports that they actually favor a strongman type prime minister to be able to rule. So this domestically plays well for Modi. You have any comments on that?
Yes, it does, clearly, and I think we saw some of this in terms of the recent election of Mr. Modi, although that election, as you know, didn't go quite in the way that he expected in terms of achieving an overwhelming majority, but he enjoys considerable domestic support, clearly, within India, in terms of the way in which, my reading of it is, the terms of the way in which he has positioned India as a more forceful global partner and has distanced himself in a way from the West. And so these policies seem to be popular. And it also must be said that in the Indian context, there is, my view of this is that increasingly the Indian media is being captured by the government, and the number of independent Indian media sources are ever diminishing, which creates, a complexity in that political environment in terms of any effort to hold and promulgate alternative views.
On y va maintenant, Madame Michaud. Allez-y, s'il vous plaît, 6 minutes.
6 minutes, Madame Michaud. Thank you, Chair. And thank you to the witnesses, Mr. Work. Yes, you're becoming a frequent flyer to our committee. Mr. Granger, thank you very much for coming forward to testify. In an article of La Presse in 2023, in response to a question by Laurence Lorrain, you said, and I'll quote, "We have to act urgently for the Sikh secessionist movement here, the separatists in Canada, the diaspora. This is a constant accusation since the 90s. And there's also, maybe there should be a referendum for Khalistan in Canada, and that would have been celebrated. Now, this is pretty raw, but what was Canada's response to that? I think Canada's responsibility is to protect its citizens, primarily, first of all, before protecting our diplomats. Perhaps we should have taken a harder-nosed approach towards India. As to the Indian opinion, in quotes, of Canada, what would be your perspective on that? Well, first of all, we should stress that India considered Canada as a country that doesn't do enough. The Canadians have the largest diaspora of Sikhs throughout the world, and we cannot control on that diaspora. However, in India, there is obsession with electoral. They want to see interference with elections here in Canada, particularly among the Sikh community. That's a problem. Second problem, which has to be taken into consideration, there are, of course, other concerns as to the reputation of the Sikh community. But within the India diaspora, we have to be very aware and sensitive to this challenge of hostilities. They are all in danger in Canada. So I would propose we can always have a harder approach towards India. We could always adopt some legislative reform here on extortion, for example. But will that really change the behavior of the Indian government in Canada? I doubt it. The intra and inter-diaspora conflicts, it would only, to ban hate language during religious events or processions, this might, in fact, attenuate some of this hostility within the diaspora. which is in fact being provoked and instigated by a foreign government. There's also the SECU in Canada, an international association, and they could themselves have religious ceremonies or processions and offer a link to the Sikh community. What kind of diplomatic response should we have? Well, we should, in fact, try to calm spirits and minds within the diasporas, first of all, in Canada, and not allow the Indian government to pierce through to provoke. We want to control their interference in Canada within that diaspora. Well, thank you. And thank you for mentioning the bill that was to exempt, to include, rather, religious ceremonies from hate speech and make of it a separate charge. We had Mr. Sharkawi in Canada who had comments that were relatively venomous. And we let that go by. That didn't bring about any charges of any thing. But I don't think it did anything but contribute to stirring the pot. On the 15th of October last, on a podcast or a radio station, that India was using targeted assassinations. Now, that's not a common international activity, but was there an effort on the Modi government? Has been a rise in aggressivity towards Canada? Well, we shouldn't try to personalize these. Don't forget that it was an internal matter to have the Blue Star massacre at Amritsar in India itself. The fundamental debate is also within their own country. National unity, which is so boasted about by Modi, is not necessarily so. It's a challenge. Now, also, what happened in Pakistan was not particularly unexpected. We could talk about these measures being marginalized or far out, but it's happening in the south of Asia, and why not in Canada? The Khalistani movement, for example, was quite active in Canada for a while, but India is attacking Canada in the United States or in the UK or in Australia. The Khalistani movement is a lot less active than in Canada. So India is attacking the hotspot of Khalistani activity and the leadership of that secessionist move. So it's not surprising that Canada should be a target. I'm quite surprised that they're using targeted assassination, but this agitation has been in existence in India for many years, and we're going to have then end there, Mr. Ganji. Thank you very much.
About 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both witnesses for being here today. And Professor Wark, maybe I'll start with you. I read the iPolitics article from October 18th, where you were interviewed extensively, and certainly your feelings on political party leaders at the federal level getting the necessary security clearance so that they can be properly briefed. You've made that very clear, what your position is on it. I will note that in other articles in the Hill Times, that position is supported by former CSIS executives. It is supported by a former CSIS director, Ward Elcock. in the conversations that I've had, private conversations with current CSIS executives, that is their position as well. And at Tuesday's meeting, when we had the new CSIS director, Mr. Daniel Rogers, I'll just quote from his testimony, quote, "I think from our perspective, the more knowledgeable that party leaders are about the threat of foreign interference and some of the specifics that we've seen through our intelligence, the more they can be aware and the more they may be able to take actions appropriate within their own parties." I think, you know, the conversation around like whether party leaders can speak freely or not, I think that's a red herring, because the part I really zeroed in on from the current CSIS director is actions, appropriate actions that a party leader can take. And I think that's very important for Canadians to understand. So, Professor Wark, could you inform the committee what you believe the actions a federal party leader can take, a federal party leader who has gotten the clearance, received the necessary briefings, what are those actions they can take in partnership with an organization like CSIS that can lend themselves to protecting our democratic processes and giving Canadians a little bit more confidence that in the next election, you know, we're taking our choice of candidates very seriously?
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. If I could just begin by saying a couple of things. I have had in the past, over a number of years, a top secret code word clearance. I appreciate the obligations that go with that. I also appreciate the benefit of it in terms of access to kinds of information and assessment that you would not otherwise have. And I can't underline, just on the basis of my own experience of holding a top secret clearance, how valuable it can be. But I would underline the value of it in two ways. One is that it is, in my view, important for any leader of a party in the House of Commons to have a top secret clearance in order to better appreciate the range of national security threats that Canada faces. And that range is very broad these days, and it goes far beyond foreign interference. So I do want to make that point. There's a broader purpose to having access and briefings from national security officials to understand the threat environment. And this may be an unfamiliar arena for political party leaders, you know, before they come into their positions of leadership. And there may be a steep learning curve. A top secret clearance is the way to climb that learning curve. The second thing, and I think you've heard from people better able to speak to this than I am, but I think the general understanding is that if you have a top secret clearance and you have the ability to have a clearer picture of potential impacts of things like foreign interference or even related activities like espionage targeting some members of your caucus, you're able to manage those problems more effectively than if you didn't have that awareness, whether it's appointments to committees, appointments to you know, shadow cabinet positions, nomination contests, and accrediting them and so on. So there are a range of activities that you can undertake, but I would just step back and say, from my perspective, the most important reason for having a top secret clearance is that ability to have a wider understanding of the national security threat environment.
Thank you for that. I want to turn to your opening comments on India's research and analysis wing. Given that, you know, the RCMP and CSIS, I mean, the spotlight is on India's activities right now in a way I don't think it was before. You know, I think from October 14th onward, there's a new conversation in Canada that we're having about India's activities here. Do you think, like, from India's perspective, do you think they're now regarding this sort of as a failed operation? I mean, they can't see this increased attention on their activities as a success. And what do you think they are going to do from this point forward now that all of this attention on? Like, are they susceptible to the international embarrassment? Do you feel like Canada's allies have sufficiently backed us up in our claims?
Mr. McGregor, thank you for that question. I think it's a very important one. And what I would say, and this may be tinged with a degree of optimism, but what I would say is that the Indian government and RAW is learning some lessons from its attempted operations in countries like the United States and Canada, unfortunately successful in one case in Canada with the murder of Mr. Najjar. What they're learning is that it's one thing to conduct covert operations in Pakistan, where the Pakistani government has a relatively weak security and intelligence capacity. It's quite a different thing to conduct these kinds of operations further afield in countries like the United States, Western European countries, the UK, Germany, which have very strong security and intelligence systems, particularly in the United States, and also that goes for Canada. I think the Indians are now having to have second thoughts about whether there's a cost-benefit, what's the cost-benefit analysis to conducting these kinds of operations, and can they really pull them off? They weren't able to pull off the U.S. operation, and that looks like a huge embarrassment for any intelligence organization. And I think they're going to have to rethink these kinds of operations targeting countries that are not in their near abroad.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. So we'll start our second round. We're running out of time, so we're going to shorten the time slots on this round. 4 minutes for these two parties and 2 minutes for the others. So, Mr. Caputo, please go ahead with 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Professor Granger and Dr. Work. I appreciate having you both here and your expertise. Dr. Work, I was really interested with your opening comments. We've just got so many questions to ask, and maybe I'll get to ask them another time or after this. I gather your expertise is wide-ranging when it comes to foreign interference, and we're obviously talking about interference from India here, but I'm wondering, when we talk about what one country does, and you've alluded to this perhaps obliquely, maybe more directly at other times, about how countries like India, when they engage in foreign interference, that they look at the treatment of other countries. In other words, how does Canada respond to foreign interference from other countries? Now, it's quite clear that Beijing has interfered in prior elections. Now, what message, in your view, is sent based on how Canada has dealt with foreign interference from Beijing in relation to how India is now attempting to, obviously carry out violence, murders, extortion? I hope I'm being clear on my question.
Thank you, sir. It's a good question, and I would approach it in this way, that let's say when a foreign country, authoritarian state like China, Russia, increasingly India, engages in foreign interference, they do so by attempting to understand their target on, if you like, two different levels. On a political level, how well can we operate politically within that country in terms of engaging with target audiences in that country? What is the state of our diaspora in that country? To what extent can we encourage them to form and hold opinions that are favorable to our official policy? So there's that political level. There's a different level in terms of foreign states like those countries trying to understand, well, what kind of resistance are we going to meet by security and intelligence agencies in those foreign countries that we're targeting? They may be able to come to a picture of that kind of political environment that they're operating in. I would suggest to you, sir, that one of the challenges for many authoritarian states, no matter what the size of their intelligence arms might be, one of the challenges is really understanding the operating environment abroad. What are they going to hit when they try and conduct operations in Canada, US, UK, Europe, and so on? And they will often engage in those operations with a degree of ignorance about their opposition, what they're going to face, and a degree of overconfidence about what they can achieve. It's because we're in the secret world now and knowing, how to understand the success of foreign interference operations. But I think one of the blind spots of many authoritarian states is that they come at foreign interference with a picture of the politics of a foreign target, which may not be very accurate. And they often come at intelligence and security operations related to foreign interference without a full understanding of what they're going to meet in terms of security pushback. And so I think my view, and I appreciate that this has been a contested issue, including throughout the public inquiry into foreign interference, my view that Canada should be seen as some kind of playground for foreign interference. My own view personally is that that's an exaggerated position. But again, I would separate it between what foreign states think about Canada as a playground politically and what they think about Canada as a playground in terms of security intelligence capabilities. And I think there are two different calculations there. Perhaps an easier target politically, harder target in terms of operations on the ground.
When I see what
Thank you,
you're
Mr. Caputo. We go now to Ms. O'Connell for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to both of our witnesses for being here. I have to say how dismayed I am once again on our second day of testimony here. We just had, I think, really powerful testimony from two members of the community in our last hour, speaking about personal threats to themselves. Mr. Moninder Singh spoke about some of the last words spoken from Mr. Niger. And the Conservatives asked in their first round if Canada is getting brushed off by India in meetings. Do you think the Sikh community experiencing threats against their life care that Canada and the Modi government brushed off some of those meetings? Or perhaps if we cowered to that pressure, like Stephen Harper, who condemned Canadians' rights for free speech, who promoted Sikh separatism, he got those meetings. Andrew Scheer got those meetings. Do you think that Canadians care about the brushing off of meetings over the safety of members of our community's lives? Like, let's seriously think about this. And Mr. Caputo, in his round of questions on a study about foreign interference of India, asked about China. I wonder how the Sikh community feels after that powerful testimony just not even an hour ago about threats to life in our country. And Mr. Caputo asked about China. Ms. Dancho asked about brushing off of meetings. Perhaps we should be asking about how the Indian government has used agents to threaten the lives of Canadian citizens. Perhaps that should be a priority in the limited time that we have in these meetings. So to our two witnesses, do you think that it provides Canadians a sense of safety and security, whether or not the Modi government likes us enough to have those meetings? Or is it better for Canada to initiate Canadian policy and take a Canadian stance that protects our citizens?
I'm happy to go first in response to that question, and through you, Chair, I would say two things. I can't speak, of course, on behalf of the Sikh community. I would say that I would hope that the Sikh community would take considerable comfort from some of the revelations about the details of Canadian diplomatic and national security efforts in terms of trying to convince the Indian government to cease its covert operations in Canada. And we have learned a great deal about that. All the members of this committee have learned an extraordinary amount about that in terms of the testimony you got a couple of days ago. We've learned more about it in the Foreign Interference Inquiry from the RCMP press conference on Thanksgiving Day. I think there are some demonstrations there that are important, not just to the Sikh community, but to Canadians as a whole, to see their government taking action diplomatically, strong action diplomatically, and taking action on the national security front. And the question of Canadian officials being brushed off should be taken seriously in the sense that Canadian officials, at the end of the day, created a policy around responding to being brushed off that was designed to try and bring a stop to these Indian covert activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. We'll go now to, on y va maintenant, Madame Michaud. 2 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
2 minutes, Madame Michaud. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Granger, we were told, obviously, that the attacks on the Sikh diaspora are because of its size and its significance in Canada. We actually received 110,000 refugees and immigrants from India. They also may feel somewhat targeted. What does it mean for long-term relationships between Canada and India with this confrontation of the Sikh diaspora? Well, in the medium term or long term, and it will depend on exactly how we're going to resolve the issues of intra-Sikh diaspora conflict. Half of the Indian diaspora are neutral or undecided on the situation. But 2 weeks ago, an Air India air flight landed at Iqaluit recently because they received a threat on board. Now, we have to use a rather more balanced view and not play one group against the other. We want to resolve that internal conflict, because in solving one problem, we may create another. In the long term now, I repeat, let's lower the tone here. There's too much tension and too much potential for political violence. It's all well and good to say that we're going to legislate this or criminalize that, but if it incites rage, it won't work. We have to have a better understanding of the legal system and the difference between the Shanghai Co-op organization, which has criminalized separatism. Well, in Canada, we didn't do that. We don't do that. And on the global, it's not scale. It's not illegal to want to have a certain political autonomy. Thank you.
McGregor, to wrap us up, please. 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Professor Work, in our first hour, we had two Sikh men who were here from their respective organizations, and I'll paraphrase them, but I think essentially what they were trying to really hammer home was that the revelations made by the RCMP on October 14th were finally confirming and validating what the Sikh community in Canada has known for decades about Canada, or about India's reach in Canada. I in my riding of Cowichan Malhat Langford out on Vancouver Island, I have a large South Asian population. My riding is home to Paldi, which is one of the oldest Sikh temples in British Columbia. And I keep going back to the NSECOP report. Like, there was one sentence in there that stated that our foreign adversaries find that Canada has been a low-risk, high-reward arena in which to operate in. And I'm just wondering if you can expand on how we flip those terms. How do we make Canada a high-risk, low-reward environment? I mean, you did talk about, CSIS and its resources being stretched, but, if in this final minute, if you want to just add some thoughts on some of the things this committee could recommend to the Government of Canada.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. I'll try and be brief and briefer than I have been in response to some other questions. First of all, I would point out to the committee that the concept of Canada being of foreign interference in Canada being low risk, high regard is a CSIS formula. And it's a formula that serves CSIS's interests and desires to constantly, bring the government's attention and senior decision makers' attention to CSIS's needs and CSIS's operations. I think it's exaggerated, to be honest, as a way of understanding things. And I don't see that there's to be honest, a lot of evidence for it. I think that, the things that we can do are things that I could try to outline, again, very briefly, but we do have to pay much more attention to stopping the activities of the covert activities of Indian diplomats in Canada. That's that's a key mission, and that requires a lot of good intelligence. We have the capabilities. We just need to really pay more attention to that issue. I think the other thing, and this will come out, I'm sure, in Justice Hoag's final report. We're going to have to devote much more resources and be much more strategic to outreach to diaspora communities that may be targeted by foreign interference from whatever direction. We have some tools to do that, but I think everyone would regard those tools as inadequate at the moment. And I think having that capacity to really engage with diaspora communities as a two-way flow of information about concerns and best practices and how the Canadian government and security intelligence community can support vulnerable diaspora communities is going to be vital going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. And thank you to our witnesses for your testimony today. It's very helpful and very much appreciated. And with that, we are adjourned.